So my father was Chan Yi Young, and my mom was Chan Lacey.
What year was your father born?
He came in 1908 and he was 14.
Did he describe to you his journey leaving China?
Not so much as the journey, the fact that he had to come over. So my dad's older brother came first because there was family business in Vancouver. But he developed what was called forelock. So it's like a white bit of hair, like you see people with it, like a little dash, right?
I never.
Yeah. And because he had this, I guess there's a superstition that because he had it, he wouldn't die in his home, right? So he said, I have to go back to China before I die because it could happen and I'm going to be away from home. So he went back to China, and there's only one other kid left. That's my dad. Because, I guess in more well-off families, they all had roles to play, right? So my uncle was going to be like the big shot business guy or village head, and my dad was going to be the scholar. And so dad was in school. They yanked him out of school, and he said, "You're next, kid, go." And so he came over to Vancouver, and there were relatives here. Right? There's always Hoisan people here, but I think he was so young and probably, as my mother put it, naive. They didn't think he could handle it, that it would be just too hard on him and he'd be taken advantage of. So they said, we better find him a safer place to be. And so he ended up in Banfield.
So you mentioned that your father ended up in
Banfield.
What sorts of jobs did he?
Well, he always worked in the kitchen. He's never worked outside of the kitchen. So he started off as, probably dishwasher person. And then he kept working out until he became the cook. And but he's pretty lonely. He's there by himself. And I think the people coming in to work on the cables or the people working in the forest, they're in and out, but he's by himself. And so he taught himself to read and write English because as a kid, as a scholar, you know how to study. And so I remember. I don't have them anymore, sadly, but he used to have those Dick and Jane books, all right? And he had the Maclean's writing. You won't remember this, but in the old days, actually, I learned it too, the Maclean's method of writing. He used to have those workbooks. So he must have practiced, because if you look through his recipe book, he's got the most beautiful penmanship ever, because he writes in the Maclean's method. You can see it. Yeah, right. Beautiful handwriting. The way we write these days is more printing than this beautiful penmanship. So he always had this beautiful handwriting. So he taught himself to read and write. And then I guess that wasn't enough. He made lots of different friends. He used to say that he met friends who were from the UK. So you see in his photo albums, he's got lots of different pictures with them. But he also met a lot of Indigenous folks, and they taught him how to fish and to crab. So he would fish, and he would can all these fish in these jars and send them home.
Where did he live in that?
He lived in, they had some buildings for the workers, and so he lived in one of those places. So in the picture here, you can probably see he's sitting in his room, like he's got a little cot there, and that's his bed, and it's got a little desk, and then that's where he spent most of his time when he wasn't cooking. But when he had a chance, he would go to Port Alberni, because that was the nearest town, and because he only had 2 weeks holiday, so when he did have the 2 weeks, I think he went to Victoria. When my mom moved to Victoria from Banfield, when she finally came, he would come home for 2 weeks. But when he had maybe a weekend off, he would go to Port Alberni.
Tell us a bit about your mother as well. What was her name and what year was she born?
I don't even know what year she was born, but I'll figure it out. I'll let you know. I'm not good with numbers. No, but she came over. So she was married first to a man who was killed in the Japanese War in China. And so it was pretty tough in those days because there wasn't a lot of food. And so she was pretty well by herself, foraging as much as possible. And then my dad's first wife died, and my brother was still a teenager, like a young teen. So he moved in with my sister and her family, but he didn't like living with all those nephews and nieces. Or, he's been the pampered boy, like the only son of the only, of my dad who was sending money home. So they said, you better marry somebody. They said to my dad, you better marry somebody to take care of the kid because he's not doing well with his sister and her family. So another cousin in the village introduced my mom and dad proxy, like through letters. Dad married my mom to his house and took my brother out. I know, weird, right? Anyway, so then they kicked around Guangzhou for that time, and then it was getting close to the end of the Immigration Act. And so because my dad could read and write, he was able to follow the newspaper, knew it was coming. He had the money saved, moved my brother and my mom to Macau, and then from Macau to Hong Kong, and then Hong Kong to Bamfield.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about your dad's work.
Sure.
Okay. How did you learn how to cook?
Well, I think he had to learn trial by fire, right? Learning from who else was in the kitchen. But clearly, he took to it, right? And I guess when you're by yourself for so long, you've got to do something to occupy yourself. And so he started making a lot of cakes. So if you look through the recipe books here, there are lots of different cakes recipes. Like he's got all sorts. Like he's got, I'll just quickly show you a couple of them. Like he's got Welsh cake. He's got pineapple upside down cake. But his most famous one, lemon pie. He did great pies. Rice pudding. He's got a Chinese version, but I don't know what that's supposed to mean.
Oyster sauce.
Yeah, so he's got all sorts of really cool stuff here. Boston brown bread. So he always used to cook. So I grew up, when my dad came home, I grew up with my dad baking all the time. He cooked, right? But he preferred to bake. And so I have a best friend who we grew up together. I was born in January. She's born in October. I lived on Princess Street. Around the block is Queens Road. And so I lived on Princess. She lived on Queens. And she was in a family of 6. And I was the only one at that point. So she said, and in fact, she just said to me the other day, she said, and she didn't get birthday parties for some, because not everybody could, right? It was a pretty stringent time during those times. And with 6 kids and only one income, sometimes you just can't do birthday parties. But I always had a birthday party because there was only me. And of course, I think because my dad virtually grew up himself in a Western environment, he saw that there were birthday parties, right? So he always made sure I had birthday parties. So she said to me actually the other day, she said, I look forward to your birthday more than you did because your dad made cream puffs. And she said, I look forward to that all year long. How cool is that, right? But there's a really interesting story. So I work at UVic, and I worked in an office where the people who deliver mail came actually right to my door. Like it didn't go to an office, it came like right to my door. So they used to always come. So I used to always give them my dad's fruit cake, like the recipe that we have. We still make the fruit cake every Christmas. It's a little bit different for wedding cakes. We made it more with rum, but the Christmas cake, we want to eat it very soon. So I would always give fruit cake to the people who deliver mail, and just to say thanks, right? And then one year, somebody came to my door who I don't know, which is kind of odd, right? You used to go, oh my gosh, who's coming to my door with an appointment? Anyways, he just said, I'm retiring this year, and I know you've been giving fruitcake to us for at least 5 or 6 years, but I wanted to say thanks. And I said, oh, you're most welcome. He said, I'm going to retire, and I just want you to know that when I eat your fruitcake, I think of my mom. And I said, oh, that's odd. I said, oh, really? Okay. And I said, where did your mom live? And he said, Pardo Bernie. Right? So it must be that recipe that was used around that time, right? Because he said, I'm never going to eat this fruitcake again, but he said, I just want you to know that. Right? Wow. So cool, right? Yeah. So Dad, when you look through some of the photo albums, my dad made fruitcake and birthday cakes and all sorts of cakes for all his friends. And you see they're decorated in different ways. They're like 2 or 3 layers. He made my wedding cake. He made it for my nephew and family friends. So at our house on the dining room table, we didn't eat at the dining room table. We ate at the kitchen table. There was always this kit there because Dad was always decorating a cake. He really loved to bake. And he cooked what he called Western food, like the occasional steak or burger, but we ate Chinese food most of the time, and so my mom did the cooking.